And I think that responsibility piece is there's something about that that's really key here that we seem to want to avoid as humans, and we want to put it onto something else, but we have to own that for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually think, going back to the perfectionism, I think perfectionism it's a bypass of responsibility. We don't want to have to own bad things, even though all of us have bad things to own. So if we hyper focus on doing everything absolutely perfect, then we can convince ourselves that we don't have to own the things that aren't perfect, that are existing right now, and we can't do anything about it.
Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. We're continuing on with our series that we're calling the selves, or personality type, and the selves. And we've already covered topics like self-awareness, self-certainty. We've talked about the difference between self-worth and self-value, and probably one more that I'm trying to remember, self-esteem. But right now we're going to talk about self-trust. And self-trust is a really interesting measurement of one's relationship to the self. It's crucial too. I think it's a really important characteristic or trait for us to build.
Yeah.
And I don't think we always have our finger on the pulse of where we can trust ourselves and where we can't. And so we tend to think, just like with all the other selves, we tend to think of it in terms of toggle switches. We either trust ourselves or we don't. What's interesting is that we didn't really want to record a video podcast today.
Well, I did want to. I just was really struggling to get my energy and all the setup to do it.
Yeah, it was particularly difficult today for whatever reason. We were even talking about how in order to do this, the video podcast, we have to logistically get set up. So like the physicality has to be prepared.
Yeah.
We have to emotionally be prepared, which is that we're in sync with each other and that we're in a pretty good space. And then we have to psychologically get prepared. Like, what's the content that we're going to teach? And if any one of those channels is off, it's really hard to just sit down and do it. But neither of us trusted ourselves into the future to get it done in a few days from now, because the next window we have is, I don't know, like 3 or 4 days from now to be able to, record podcasts and make sure that we have them out on time.
Yeah.
And so we both determined, even though all we wanted to do was flake off, it's like all we wanted to do was anything else.
Yeah.
We're like, I don't know if I'd trust future Joel and future Antonia to make that happen, but I know I can do it now. So we're just going to go ahead and make it happen right now. And that's a very interesting, it almost sounds like a lack of trust, right? Because I can't necessarily trust myself in the future. But in my opinion, it is a sign of self-trust in that it's fulfilling our commitment, right? The commitment that, not that we have a commitment to anybody else, but the commitment we have to getting a podcast out on time every week.
Yeah.
And so where we trust ourselves and don't trust ourselves is interesting. It's like, is doing it right now a symbol of self-trust, right? That I'm going to follow through with my commitments? Or is it a lack of trust because I'm not trusting future Antonia to make sure that I have the time for it, whereas today I had time scheduled.
Yeah.
So that's what we want to dive into. We want to dive into a more sort of zoomed in conversation around this concept of self-trust.
Now, we get a lot of comments from people. People write in on surveys we send out, and we ask people their feedback, comments under videos and podcasts. People report a challenge with self-trust. Often we'll get questions like, how do I and my personality, how do I build self-trust? How do I know that I can trust and rely on myself? When I hear that, I'm not sure we're all talking about the same thing. Mm-hmm. When someone says that, so one of the personality types that I hear this a lot from are IFJs and INFJs in particular. But when an INFJ writes into us and says, I'm struggling with self-trust, how do I trust myself? I think they struggle with a very different kind of self-trust than I struggle with in my life. Mm-hmm. Like I struggle with like making sure I'm going to feel in the mood to do something into the future. Or like right now, I don't necessarily trust myself to have good content or talk about things intelligently because I don't feel like doing this right now. So
right.
like, I don't have my feelings connected. It's all very motivation and feeling based for me. Mm-hmm. So my suspicion is, as we unpack this conversation, we're going to get a sense of, different personality types, different people how they're wired, have a little bit of a different viewpoint of this. You might have a very different viewpoint than I do, Antonia. It's probably not about motivation and emotion for you. Maybe it's like your ability to maybe do something social with people, or I don't know. How would you interpret when you think about self-trust? What are you tapped into in your own person?
It's my ability to remain consistent with my core principles and to show up when I've said I'm going to show up.
Wow. So it's not, I mean, I'm very much connecting mine to getting something done in the outside world, being able to be motivated to handle something. And that's where mine is focused. So yours is more about core principles, which would probably be an introverted thinking or accuracy framework.
Right. Well, it does also relate to showing up, because there is a sense that if I've told myself I'm going to do something and I don't do it, I flake out. I can't really trust myself to follow through with my commitments, right? If I go, and I actually heard this from an INFJ, one of the INFJs in our Empowered program.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really powerful. This is, an INFJ would also use introverted thinking or accuracy. They'd use that as a 10-year-old or tertiary function. It's my second function, my co-pilot or auxiliary. And the way they defined it, I said, that's definitely an aspect of self-trust that I resonate with, even though I hadn't put language to it. They said it's Daniel, who's one of the INFJs that we interviewed, and he said, if I tell myself I'm going to go to the gym and I don't go to the gym, why would I trust myself to do other things? He said it's like a relationship with another person. If they say they're going to be someplace at a certain time and they stand you up, you stop trusting them when they say they're going to meet you.
Yeah.
You stop trusting that they're reliable or that they're capable of doing the things that they say they're going to do. And I believe that is one of the components to trusting oneself as well. If I say that I'm going to be faithful to an exercise regime, or I say that I'm going to do things that I know are in mine and others' best interest, but they're hard, and so I flake out, how would that not erode my trust in myself, just like it would erode my trust in somebody who stood me up, right? I mean, I get to be there and I get to experience the entire thing, so it's not like I'm not asking, where did I go, right? Where did that person go? Why didn't they show up? So I have more information, but it doesn't mean that I have any more integrity just because I know the story of I didn't feel like it, and it's just my commitment to myself.
Yeah.
So self-trust includes a big portion of me showing up to the things that I've said I'd show up to, in some ways, especially for myself. I remember that we were, I think it was I can't remember if we had company or somebody was going to come over to, I don't know, like a plumber or something. And it was our weekly day to clean house. And I gathered the kids together. Your boys were both with us, and I gave them all, tasks to do.
Yeah.
And it was getting closer to the time that the person or people, I don't remember who was coming over, but it was closer to the time that they were coming over. And I remember Sawyer, I was like picking up the pace, and I was like, come on guys, let's get it going. And I remember Sawyer, your younger son, said, why does it matter to you so much that other people are going to judge your house? Because his assumption was that I was doing that to make it so that I wouldn't be judged. And there's definitely a little bit of that. I mean, I have extroverted feeling or harmony as my 10-year-old or tertiary. So I am sensitive to the judgments of other people about how I take care of my things to some extent. not in a high amount, but there is a piece of that. But I checked in with myself and I realized it was like, no, this is the day we clean house. And that was the day that I had set that aside. And I wanted to follow through with it. And I said, it's actually more about my integrity to myself. I want to make sure that my house is clean. It's nice to have a social reason as an impetus that keeps us going a little faster, but it's actually more my statement to myself. And he has istj preferences, and he just kind of went, yeah, okay, I can see that. I can appreciate that. And I think that self-trust is getting to that kind of relationship with oneself. It's getting to a place where integrity becomes more important than other factors.
Yeah.
And I think it also allows for a little wiggle room. I don't think it's a place of rigorous self-discipline where you never allow any sort of, flexibility or opening for other things to come in. I don't think that is necessarily self-trust. In fact, in some ways, it's almost an assumption that you're going to mess up, and so you have to stay super rigorous all the time. But I do think that an ability or a willingness to make sacrifices in order to follow through with your commitments to yourself and the things you've heard yourself say out loud, or at least in your head, to me, that's a big piece of it.
So I'm noticing that we're almost, without awareness, couching self-trust in this idea of congruence and reliability. But like when I think about, but I don't take an audit necessarily of the self. When I think about like my competence, like I never doubt myself that I can come up with good ideas, or I can come into a brainstorming session or have creative things come from my mind. I lead with extroverted intuition. We've nicknamed it exploration. And I have complete and total, in fact, I have got too much trust in that. I probably over trust myself there, maybe when I shouldn't. Maybe that's a little out of balance in a way. But I don't think so. I mean, that I'm open to that, but I don't think I trust myself there too much. I don't trust that I will do the wrong thing, like my integrity or my morals won't come through for me. I never doubt that I won't do the moral or ethical thing in how I've determined my core values. Never question it. But I do doubt things, like as in ENFP preferences, things that are in more of my weaker areas, like my effectiveness, 10-year-old ability to get things done on a timeline, stay true to a commitment I've made to execute on this external marker. Also tracking details with my introverted sensing, 3-year-old inferior process of memory. We've nicknamed it memory. I don't have a lot of self-trust that I'm going to be able to do those things. So I wonder if there's a pattern emerging in self-trust that our cognition is kind of schismed here. And maybe we're talking about it because both of us have this like tracking and timeline focus. But I wonder if other people that have that as a strength actually lack self-trust in other areas of their cognition or life.
So I think this is bleeding over into, and the whole purpose of the selves was to clean, slice them as much as humanly possible. It's
Absolutely.
a very introverted thinking or accuracy conversation, honestly.
And by the way, if you haven't listened to the whole series, the last few episodes, go back and listen, because we're kind of building information as it goes.
Right. Yeah. And there is some spillover into that concept of certainty and uncertainty that we talked about, which is that our first two functions are a place of certainty. That first function in particular, it's a place of overconfidence generally. By the time we get to our third function, we're feeling a lot less certain. So we usually need other people's approval to go, no, yeah, you did it right. And so then we have this overcompensating energy there, which is like, I did it right? Like, look at all the ways I've done it well. And then the fourth function, that inferior 3-year-old function, is a place of deep uncertainty.
Yeah.
And for both of us, we share the same 3-year-old or inferior. So yeah, we're not going to have a lot of trust in our ability to track things,
of course,
and account for them.
And we recorded a whole podcast about that.
Right.
Personality types and uncertainty, where we address that directly.
Exactly. I think trust is, all of these are related but adjacent to each other, or at least I'm pretending they are, because the purpose of the series is actually not to necessarily get further into type theory. It's to use type as a bridge of self-awareness, as we mentioned in the very first of the series. We're trying to get access points or on-ramps to self-awareness. How am I operating? So in some ways, this is almost like, I don't know, like water wings, right?
Yeah.
It's not really a way of swimming, but it's a way of sort of hovering around the topic and going, what really is going on here, right? So it's just it's training wheels to some extent. And I actually do think that these functions can give us very deep access to how we're cognitively wired naturally and the things we tend to pay attention to. So I think that they are solid on-ramps. When I call them water wings, I don't want to undervalue them. But at the same time, this is not like, this is how it works in type theory. It's more like, here are the challenges we have in understanding ourselves and gaining greater self-awareness. So let's take this aspect of self-awareness and filter it through a concept of type and see what we can come up with.
Absolutely. And I think that there's value in clean slicing these ideas like trust versus certainty in order to understand them, but they really do all work in tandem in our lives. Like our experience isn't, well, now I'm in the category of self-trust today, and tomorrow I'll be in the category of self-certainty. Like, it's all happening simultaneously. We just isolate them to talk about them.
Right, exactly. So I think...
So basically what you're saying is we're not going to go through 16 types, type by type, and apply this to each type. We're going to find some patterns and principles that you listening or watching can reflect on and apply it to your own life.
Right.
That's basically what you're trying to say.
Yeah, it's unlikely that we're going to talk about self-trust in all 16 types. That said, there are probably a couple different cognitive access points that might get us a little closer. And I think it's unsurprising that your definition or your relationship to self-trust is more through the lens of introverted feeling or authenticity. For the most part, it sounds like it.
Mm-hmm.
And mine is introverted thinking or accuracy. And I think that's twofold. First, there are preferred judging functions. So they're the strongest ones. They're the ones that we tend to reference more often. And also they're introverted evaluative functions. They like go inside and they go, what do I think of myself in this way? What is my evaluation on that? They're judging. So I think that to some extent, well, I wouldn't be surprised if self-trust for all types in some ways hinges on our relationship to our introverted judging function. Now, if that's fourth function for you, if you're an EJ type, don't panic. I think it can still have very solid self-trust.
Yeah.
But it might be a little more difficult to determine the very, I don't know, like fleshed out or very filleted out definitions of it. It might be really simple, right? The further down a function is, the more simple the definitions around that become. So it might be actually much more simple for an EJ type to go, this is how self-trust looks for me. If I meet that criteria, done. If it's higher up, you might have a lot more fidelity in it. And also you might know when your self-trust is getting eroded. So I think if you're down for it, on all of these, I've gone into etymology of the word and how the word shows up. Okay.
Let's dive deep.
Let's do that. So I don't usually have cheat sheets. So every time I pick this up and go, yeah, I'm going to read off of this. Kind of weird. All right. So self-trust, the verb, it's really the verb for trust, is to rely upon and make strong and safe. So to trust is to rely upon and make strong and safe, which I thought was really interesting when it comes to our concept of self-trust. How does one make a relationship with self strong and safe? I like that.
Well, and I would just immediately pattern and say people really are struggling with safety in their lives and they're craving it. And I think it's probably related to a trust issue of self. Mm-hmm. Like they're craving external safety for themselves. Mm-hmm. And maybe there's a lack of self-trust that's requiring that to be met in the outer world.
Mm. Yeah, I actually have I very rarely have an example or an anecdote, but I have one actually of an experience I had just yesterday, which might be relevant. Then the noun is veracity. Veracity basically meaning habitual truthfulness, right? It's a person who is honest most of the time and tries to be accurate. And another, synonym for trust is integrity. And this is where we go into the principle level. It's strong moral principles, but I like that integrity is also a state of being whole and undivided. So this almost gets into our previous conversations about individuation, which is a relationship to whole self. So to some extent, self-trust also requires a relationship to ourselves in an undivided way. Like we are tracking all the parts of ourselves that are accessible to us in the time that we are in. I can break that down in a minute. And then finally, faithfulness, which is basically loyalty. It's an ability to keep your promises and observe your duties, which is closer to my definition, which was like, well, did I make a commitment? Did I show up to the commitment? Okay, now I trust myself. And I do think that based on type, not just those introverted judging functions, not just introverted thinking accuracy or introverted feeling authenticity, but as all of our functions, I do think this touches on elements of all, particularly the judging functions, the feeling and thinking functions. And I do think trust is going to be more related to the judging functions than it is the perceiving functions. Because just like we mentioned in a previous podcast, it's going to be about evaluation. Do I trust this person? Right? Can I trust them? And it's just that we're talking about ourselves when we ask the question. So I do think our judging functions or decision-making functions help us make that determination. So I think the conversation should probably stay a little bit more in the realm of those functions than, say, intuition and sensing.
Yeah, and something you said earlier where you said it hinges on the introverted judging functions. And as I'm reflecting, and you said maybe like an EJ might simplify their criteria, but that simplification is to cover maybe some uncertainty there. And I think that people that have introverted judging functions in the lower parts of their cognitive function stack or in the backseat of their car, in the car model, I think they're the ones that tend to report a lack of self-trust the most. It's not that we don't all deal with it. I've just anecdotally noted, I haven't done the numbers, maybe I'm totally wrong, but like, there's not a lot of IPs, for example, that write into us and say, I'm really struggling with self-trust. Like they might have other aspects of the self they struggle with, but usually they really trust themselves. And I wonder if you're onto something. That hinging on the introverted judging function is part of it, because again, like IFJ is that introverted thinking or accuracy 10-year-old tertiary process. It's that critical voice in the head, right? For an INFJ, I can see that eroding self-trust like crazy. And I see INFJs talking about self-trust all the time. So it must be an issue that is coming up, and maybe again, it's hinging on that function.
And what people are trusting themselves around.
Of course.
I also wonder if, I think this is also related a bit to maturity. I see younger IP types having less self-trust, but it's usually not, again, so that certainty model or the idea or concept of certainty is really helpful in these conversations.
Yeah.
So if you haven't heard that podcast, I highly recommend you do, because we're probably going to be referencing it a bit. The higher up a function goes, the more certainty we have around it, and certainty in its ability to help guide us through life. If a function is our first function, that dominant or driver function, we think it's the right tool for all the jobs. And so introverted thinking accuracy for ITPs and introverted feeling or authenticity for IFPs, they're going to have high certainty that they're doing it right. I'm thinking the right thoughts. I have the right intentions and motivations, or, I'm very, I know myself and I understand myself for introverted feeling or authenticity. That's the direction they would go. I know myself. I know what's right for me. Introverted thinking or accuracy would be like, I'm being logical. I'm assessing the situation through, a clean lens. I'm not that biased. I know how things work. And so there's a sense of high certainty with that, regardless of age, because we just come with a sense of certainty around that. But there might be a lot of uncertainty around how one is going about doing things. And so when I've noticed when IPs lack self-trust, it's trust in their judgment to do things in the outside world. So an ITP type might not really trust their ability to navigate a social situation. They might have very low self-trust around that. And that, I think that's where the extroverted judging functions come in with, I said they hinged on the introverted judging functions because we're self-assessing. But we're self-assessing sometimes what we've done in the outside world, right? Like I watched myself do that and I didn't do it very well.
Yeah.
And I got a lot of heat for it. So maybe I shouldn't trust myself when it comes to that. It's still, for an ITP, it's still introverted thinking or accuracy going, I'm not competent there. It's still a self-assessment, but it's also assessing one's performance and going, I shouldn't trust myself in social situations maybe. The anecdote I had, that experience I had was with, I think, an IFP type. And it was a younger girl who was a cashier at a store I was at yesterday making purchases. And it was really interesting how you could tell she had a lot of self-doubt around how she was going about her job. And she narrated it for me. It was really interesting. There were some porcelain items I had purchased, just dishes, like serving dishes.
Yeah.
And she let me know, she goes, okay, because it was clothing and then it was some dishes and it was like a decorative item here or there. And, it was like one of those stores that sell a lot of everything or a lot of variety of things. And so she put the clothes to the side and she's like, I'm putting the clothes to the side now. I'm like, okay. And then she goes, and I'm going to put the dishes over here. And I'll decide whether or not I'm going to wrap them in a minute. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so she finished up with all the other softer, clothing items and that sort of thing. And then when she got to the dishes, the servingware, the porcelain, serving dishes, she goes, should I wrap these? I'm like, well, you're the professional. I'm like, I'm sure this is not your first rodeo, so you can do as you see fit. And she's like, I feel like I should wrap them, but I don't know. I mean, it was kind of charming in a way that she was so forthcoming with her uncertainty around it. And I just said, well, what does your judgment tell you? And she said, wrap them. That's what I should do. I should wrap them. And I'm like, well, I agree. I was like, if you wrap them, they're not going to get chipped as easy. And I don't want to go home with chipped dishes. So I would go with your judgment. She's like, okay, that's what I'm going to do.
Is this the first time she's ever sold a dish in this place, or?
Well, I feel like if it had been her first day, she would have told me because she was very forthcoming.
But like nobody's bought porcelain dishes or anything? Like she's never had to wrap them before in her role? Like ever? Or
she has, but it's maybe been more obvious in the past, or maybe she just always gets the input of the person who's her customer.
See, I'm interpreting immediately she's trying to get out of doing it, and she's hoping you'll let her off the hook by saying, "Oh, you don't need to worry about it. I'll just take them as they are." Like it's not an uncertainty frame. I think again, I wasn't there.
Yeah.
But I'm reading it as, she doesn't want to do extra work unless you request it as the customer.
No,
like, I don't want to go the extra. I don't want to do this extra work. Do you want me to wrap it? And that's why she was checking in with you. That's how I interpreted it.
Yeah. No. Well, maybe, but that's not the sense I got. I didn't get a sense that she was trying to get out of work. I got a sense that she really lacked trust of her own judgment. That she didn't want to do something that would upset me. Maybe she'd had a couple run-ins with really salty customers or something. But it was a hesitation of, is this the right way to go about this? Is this going to...
So it wasn't trying to get you to do it for her or check in to see if you could let her off the hook. You definitely feel like the motivation was...
There was a little bit of an assumption that I was going to help her with her job. There definitely was. But it didn't feel like trying to get out of work. It felt like an uncertainty, a lack of trust in her ability to do it on her own. That's what it felt like. She felt very sincere.
Certainly. Okay.
Yeah. And again, she was probably late teens. I doubt early 20s. I think she was probably hovering around 18 or 19. So young, right? And kind of depends on, not every 18-year-old is the same, right? 18 isn't 18 isn't 18. Some 18-year-olds are like very much still under their parents, in their world and looking to their parents to make all their decisions for them. And a little, younger for their age. And some 18-year-olds are like living on their own and bought their car and, they're off doing they're doing their life. So at this point, you can't really judge maturity by age anymore, I don't think. That said, it just really felt like she was almost immobilized by this lack of trust in her judgment. So as she was wrapping it up, she's like, yeah, my mom tells me I just really need to trust myself more. And she's like wrapping up all these things, telling me about her mom and that her mom says that she just really needs to trust her own judgment and make more decisions and be more decisive. It was super charming. And I said, well, your mom's right. You do need to trust your judgment more because you have two different options. The one is your judgment was right. It was accurate and you did the right thing. Or you totally messed it up and now you have an opportunity to learn from that experience. And she's like, yeah, you're right. That is. And so it was an interesting interaction. It took a long time because it took a while for her to wrap all of these things up because, again, she is not an assertive person at this age. I'm sure she will be at some point in the future. But what I realized is that her lack of self-trust, her lack of trust in her own judgment, is in part her inability to move forward if she believes that she's going to do it wrong.
Yeah. Risking failure.
Yes.
Is important for her.
Yeah.
Because if she doesn't risk it not going well, she's never going to try. And then she's not going to get the reference experience to build self-trust.
That's right. And so a part of self-trust, it's not implicit in the definition, but a part of self-trust, and I think this is why it bleeds over not just into the introverted judging functions to some extent, but just into peopling in general. I think you have to have the ability to be kind to yourself, no matter what the result of your action was. I think you need to be able to forgive yourself if you mess up. Trusting oneself and trusting one's own judgment means that no matter what happens on the other side, regardless of whether or not you succeed or failed or it was just fine or you totally messed up or whatever it was, that at that moment, you know that you're not going to like self-flagellate and you're not going to drop into a puddle of, you know, of jello because you didn't do this thing right. And maybe, I mean, sometimes I think we get that modeled back to us, that people expect us to do it right the first time. If we have like particularly harsh parents that everything had to be perfect, and if it wasn't, we knew we were going to get it. I think, though, to some extent, this has been a societal message, which is that if you do things wrong, and if it's wrong enough, and if enough people notice, and enough people have decided that your judgment was off, terrible things can happen to you, right? Like on social media or whatever. And so it's part of the zeitgeist. Part of the zeitgeist is you don't trust yourself. You check in with the collective. You make sure everybody's on board with this before you move forward. And I think that's one of the reasons why self-trust needs to be figured out in terms of where am I lacking it and where do I have it? Because at the end of the day, nobody is going to be responsible for your choices in the sense that they're not going to take the heat if they don't turn out well. If you lacked trust in yourself and you checked in with the collective and it was a terrible choice for your personal life, it's not like the collective is going to show up and go, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, yeah, you're right. Our bad. We told you to do this thing," or you checked in with us and we gave you the okay, but it turned out bad. So we're going to make it up to you. The collective will be making it up to you.
Here's your apology letter, publicly posted. Now, my thinking about this is evolving as we talk, actually. I'm coming into, I'm opening perspectives for myself. Like I'm actually seeing more viewpoints. We just kind of anchored in and said, well, it really is the judging functions. And I was like, yeah, and the introverted judging functions at hinging on those makes sense to me because of people that struggle with self-trust, blah, 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 infj, whatever. I just had that whole thing I talked about. And then I'm realizing, well, I mean, this girl you're talking about yesterday and her experience was as a person who you suspect has a dominant or driver introverted judging function of introverted feeling or authenticity, most likely an IFP. Your suspicion is that she had a lot of uncertainty in executing the outer world. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, okay, so I don't think it's just the internal judging functions. I think any cognitive function, all four that are judging, decision-making, have probably self-trust issues depending on how they are in our cognition. And I was like, okay, but I can still stick with the judging functions. Then I just realized as you were talking about the collective and all these things, I mean, duh, but I'm realizing like how many times in the past, let's say a couple years, I'm looking at a TV screen or a video of something happening in the actual experience. I'm not going to say anything specific because I think we all have our individual version of that. And the person is telling me something with their voice that directly conflicts with what I'm seeing in the image behind them or around them or the images I'm watching. And I think a lot of people then it's not just about the judgments now, it's also about my perception. Well, they're saying this is something different than what I think I'm seeing in my vision, my viewpoint. And I think I don't doubt what I necessarily perceive, but I think some people do. They're like, well, I'll contort myself to what I'm being told rather than what I'm experiencing or seeing. I'll contort myself to the narrative cast, and I won't trust myself that what I'm actually looking at is true. I'll trust the narrative over my own eyes. And that's weird to me, first of all. Like, I mean, I'm an intuitive. Ostensibly, I'd be like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But that's weird to me that we would trust a narrative over our own lived experience. But we're so disconnected and we're so digitized in our world, and we don't really have a lot of direct experiences. So I can kind of see why people, I mean, I had to do this when I was a religious person. I had to contort. So I guess maybe that's as I'm talking out loud, maybe that's what it is. It's like a belief level, almost like a cult or a belief thing that people buy into. And then all the reality has to contort around this narrative that I've decided upon, that I believe.
Right.
My God, that erodes self-trust though. Part of my self-trust issues in the past 10 years was getting over my faith background, telling me, gaslighting me to say I was wrong and bad because it didn't match the narrative, even though my lived experience was totally outside that narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really damaging. I think that was even more damaging to my self-trust than even any judgments I could make or any can I rely on myself to get something done next week? I'm actually realizing that perceptive self-trust eroded things in me way more than my judgments. I'm just, as we're talking this out.
Yeah. I would still argue that goes back to our introverted judging functions to some extent, but I love that you beautifully weaved in that there is definitely a perceptive part. Because what you're talking about, the narrative is generally built on a belief structure. And our belief structures are adopted by our introverted feeling authenticity or introverted thinking accuracy. And if we trust at the center of it all that we have the right way of seeing things, then especially if it was something that was given to us or adopted by trusted people. Of course, you and I both were raised in the religions of our youth.
Yeah.
And so it's really complex there. It's like in order to keep relationship with those people and in order to justify the world that is, or the systems that are built around us.
Yeah.
Because if you're raised in certain kinds of contexts, our experience is religious, but there's lots of different contexts.
Yeah.
Where people are raised in a situation where all of the system and the logistics around us support that worldview. Mm-hmm. So in order to be a part of society, and in order to be a part of the system, we have to sort of contort what we're perceiving to fit these narratives. And so it gets real complex. It's like I have to be true to myself. Well, what's being true to myself? Believing in this thing. That's what's true to me. And then our perceiving functions take in information that is contradictory to the thing that's true to me.
Yeah.
And then we got to sort of jerry-rig it, right? And like sort of squeeze that square peg in that round hole. And then we have to also not 100% trust ourselves, because usually in those kinds of situations, we're being told explicitly and implicitly not to trust ourselves.
Yeah.
And to trust the collective, whatever that means. And so we hand our power over to them. Then we discover at a certain point, the collective is not going to bear the burden of your poor choices. They will punish the choices they don't think that you're supposed to make. But as long as they were cool with you making that choice to begin with, if it has terrible consequences, that one's on you. You've got to face them. So it gets really, really tough. And I think when somebody comes to a place of self-trust, understanding that there is a little bit of cognitive theory here.
Sure.
But just as humans, when we get to a place of self-trust, it's usually when we've shed a lot of that and gone, I don't know if I want to contort my identity and my mind, who I think I am and what I think I believe. I don't know if I want to contort that into fitting somebody else's mold, because that mold will not be there for me through the tough times, on the moment-to-moment, day-to-day judgments and decisions I have to make. Like the girl who was the checkout clerk, what decisions is she making in her life beyond whether or not she should wrap the porcelain dishes? If that one, which is her job, and I was like customer 400 that day. And again, I'm pretty sure she's the kind of person who would have told me if it was her first day. I'm pretty sure she'd have given me the line, this is my first day, so I'm figuring it out. And she did not say that, right? It seemed like she had been there for a while. She seemed to have that kind of casual relationship with her coworkers. So I'm customer like 1,000 for her, maybe, at least. I'm assuming she hasn't been there forever, but I'm assuming this is not the first week. So there are far more complex decisions to make that are not a decision she had to make like 100 times that day. And so why does she lack the ability to trust her judgment? If she lacks her ability to trust her judgment on something so basic and repetitious, how is she getting through life? How is she making any more complex or complicated decisions? And my suspicion is she is always checking in with others.
Yeah.
She is always making sure that other people are giving her the thumbs up and the green light. And since that's the case, as long as she continues to perpetually outsource all of her decision-making, she will never come to the point where she trusts herself, because she will never observe herself making a good decision and patting herself on the back because it was totally hers, or making a terrible decision and going, man, I really need to learn from that. I'm gonna fail again and fail better. I'm gonna do better next time. She won't have that experience because it's always being outsourced. And I think that happens a lot. I mean, she was a very extreme example of it. It was very easy to point it out. But I think that we're doing that maybe in a higher level. And I think we're doing that a lot. And the people who gain the most self-trust are the ones who stop checking in all the time. They stop going, what does everybody else think about this? Or how should I be thinking about this according to other people?
Yeah.
They start owning their decisions, and they get to a place where if they made the right one, they reward themselves for that. And if they made the wrong one, they don't beat themselves up. They go, okay, there are lessons to be learned. I'm going to take the lessons. I'm going to do better next time.
So something came up for me as you were talking about her and you were unpacking this idea of belief, like religious structure. So I think I have a very unique experience. I think there's other people like me, and I think you might be in the same vein. In my religious background, I really was attuned to focusing on what was the right belief. But actually, as you were talking, I realized I think most people, though, are playing defense. They're more focused on not having the wrong belief than they are about adopting the right belief. In other words, they're trying to not be in trouble by whatever. And so they don't want to think the wrong thing. It's not about so much thinking the right thing or like, I'm attuning to this. And I think that girl is a great example of that. The person that worked with you yesterday, or you worked with yesterday, checking you out at the counter, she was more fearful of having the wrong end of the stick. She didn't want to do something wrong. She was playing defense, protecting herself, right? Covering her butt on, I don't want to do the wrong thing. That was what eroded self-trust. It wasn't like, I really think this is the right belief to believe, to check in with customers, to see if they want their stuff wrapped. It was a defensive move on her side. And I think that's probably how I think a lot of people experience it. Whatever belief system they're part of. I don't think, it's been my experience that most people don't really believe whatever narrative they have to follow. They're just kind of like, I don't want to be in trouble. I don't want to get kicked out of the tribe or be ostracized or humiliated or shamed into something.
Yeah.
And so I'll behave. I'll pretend like I completely buy this narrative. I'll pretend like I don't see what's on the TV screen because I don't want to be in trouble. So I think it's a very defensive thing.
I agree. Or have maybe she's had customers that were really salty before.
Yeah.
And she didn't want to do that. Or have that experience again. But
so I didn't mean to take us down a crazy road.
No.
This is all coming up for me in real time as we talk.
Yeah. And I think that's right. I think most people are playing defense. The challenge with that is trust gets created with a couple different things. One of them is, as I mentioned, following through. When I say I'm going to do something, I do it. I don't hesitate. I say, this is the thing I'm going to do. That means that I have to be willing to make commitments. That means that I have to pull the trigger on saying I'm going to do something. If I'm always hedging and looking to everybody else to help me make my decisions, how often am I going to make commitments that I have to now follow through with? So the first thing is to be willing to make a commitment, to follow a duty, an honor. That was one of the definitions of trust, which was fulfilling your commitments and having a sense of loyalty. So when you build self-trust, the loyalty is to the self. You have a sense of loyalty to yourself, which is if you mess up and somebody comes at you because you messed up enough for them to notice, you're going to be loyal to yourself enough to stand up for yourself and say, I have a right to make mistakes. I've noticed that it's not just personality types. I mean, if we want to bring in Enneagram, I think there are some Enneagram types that have some challenge with this. And I do think that there might be some Myers-Briggs types that have some challenge with this too. Perfectionism, I've noticed almost every single personality type I have personally profiled has to some extent claimed to have perfectionism. It's just what they're a perfectionist around is completely different. A lot of them call themselves overthinkers too. I think it surprises people that how often you'll profile it like an ESFP type that says I'm a overthinker. Because the assumption is like only INTJs are overthinkers, right? INTJs will not claim to be overthinkers necessarily. They're like, no, I'm doing just the right amount of thinking.
I'm not doing enough. I'm an underthinker.
I'm underthinker.
Oh God, it's all going to go to crap.
I've only spent 12 hours today thinking. That's total underthinker. But most people claim some form of perfectionism. I'm a perfectionist. What they're a perfectionist in changes from person to person.
I just care too much.
I just care too much. The challenge with perfectionism is that you don't give yourself quarter when you aren't perfect. You're not kind to yourself. You beat yourself up. You go, it wasn't okay that I made this mistake, which is why I'm going to spend so much time and effort ensuring I don't make any mistakes. And this is something that I think massively erodes self-trust because it is a symbol of disloyalty to the self. And because if we were loyal, we'd hang with ourselves through thick and thin. When I make a commitment in a marriage, I've committed to you, you mess up, I'm not like, that's it, it's over. I'm like, no, I'm committed to you through thick and thin, proverbially. I have said that even when you make a mistake, I'm gonna hang. And even if the mistakes are really huge and I'm like really salty about them, I'm like, you shouldn't have made that mistake. That was a big one. It hurt me a lot. I'm gonna go lick my wounds now. I'm still hanging because that's my commitment to you. Now, are there things you could do to me that would break the commitment? Well, I would experience them as you had broken the commitment. And so I wasn't the first person to do that. So there are some things that would be deal breakers. But they're really, 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 really big ones. And one of the reasons why I married you is because I'm pretty sure you're not going to do any of those. So loyalty means that I hang with you even if you show up imperfect. And if we have self-loyalty, we're going to hang with ourselves even if we show up imperfect. And when we mess up, when we have mistakes, when we are imperfect, and we watch ourselves be kind and gentle with ourselves, doesn't mean that we're necessarily sanctioning it. Doesn't mean that we say, yeah, I totally should have done that. That terrible thing I did that was what I had to do. And it was right that I did it. Now we go, no, I legitimately own that I messed up. And I messed up. So I'm going to play cleanup. If I hurt people, I'm going to go take care of that. I'm going to change course. I'll take all the lessons I can from the experience, do my best to take the right lessons. And I said, fail again, fail better, but that's a Samuel Beckett quote. Ever tried, ever failed. No matter, try again. Fail again, fail better. So I'm going to allow myself to fail better in the future. And when you watch yourself do that with yourself, your level of self-trust skyrockets. Because now you know that if your judgment was poor in a moment, it's not that you're trusting your judgment will always be right. That's not what self-trust is. It's not saying I'm always going to have the right end of it. It's if I got it wrong, it's going to be okay. It's not the end of the world. I'm going to trust that I can do the right thing. And if I didn't, I can get through it and get to the other side. So perfectionism is one of the biggest killers of self-trust. And I think when we give ourselves the gift of self-compassion, now our self-trust starts to go up.
I think there's also something related to responsibility here as well. I agree with everything you said. I think you're absolutely right. And also I think there's a little bit of an avoidance. Like I'm looking at my own life and going, the times when I don't trust myself are also the times that I don't want to take responsibility for myself either. Because we went skydiving recently, tandem skydiving, where I had to like click on a dude was on my back and he had a parachute on his. I had to implicitly and explicitly trust this guy that he knew what he was doing when we're falling out of an airplane at 2 miles up, 10,000 feet, that he's going to pull the chute and we're going to make it down to the ground at some point.
Did it work out? Did you die?
I did, but it's okay. I was a reference experience. I learned a lot. So I had to really trust this guy, like rest into him. And I trusted that he was going to take responsibility for my life. Now, I also had responsibility in that. Like I couldn't mess him up to do that. I had to cooperate with his instructions. I had to do everything he said. I've got to be, I can't like fight against him. But let's just assume like we're talking about ourselves. When I trust myself, I'm trusting that I'm going to be responsible for myself as well and own that responsibility. And I think that's a key piece of this, that with maturity, we probably also take on more and more responsibility in life, both self-responsibility and external responsibility. And we probably, like, self-trust is probably in a maturation process naturally in the normal course of our growing up experience. You know, I trust myself to drive a car when I was 16. Probably at 5, I wouldn't have, I mean, maybe I thought I could have, but I probably wouldn't have been that much self-trusting myself to drive a vehicle. So these are things that we mature into, I guess. And I think that responsibility piece is something, there's something about that that's really key here that we seem to want to avoid as humans, and we want to put it onto something else, but we have to own that for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually think, going back to the perfectionism, I think perfectionism is it's a bypass of responsibility. We don't want to have to own bad things, even though all of us have bad things to own. So if we hyper focus on doing everything absolutely perfect, then we can convince ourselves that we don't have to own the things that aren't perfect, that are existing right now, and we can't do anything about it. Like, it's a way to punt the ball. And so I agree. I think that ownership and responsibility is another way that we can trust ourselves. I mean, one of the best ways to understand how self-trust works is, how do I trust another human being? And it works the exact same way for myself. Would I trust you if you could never own your mistakes? Of course I wouldn't, because I'm now going to think you lack good judgment. It's because you won't learn from your mistakes. You won't learn from the things you did wrong. So why would I ever trust you in your judgment? So if I can't own my mistakes, if I can't take responsibility for mine, I'm in the same boat. I can't trust my judgment because I can't trust that I'll learn from the things that I did in the past. And I think that's why I said, to begin with, fulfilling my commitments. I don't trust other people who say they're going to be someplace at a certain time and then don't show up. So if I say I'm going to be at a certain place at a certain time, I'm going to hit the gym at 9 a.m. and I just don't ever do that. And I go, tomorrow I will. How can I trust myself? I wouldn't trust that other person. So when you're trying to figure out ways to build this characteristic, this trait, which is really important, by the way, self-trust allows us to live a full and complete life.
Yeah.
If we lack self-trust, we will always hesitate. We will always throttle everything because we won't know, can I get through it? Can I get to the other side? How will I know? Sometimes you just got to pull the trigger. But if you lack self-trust, you will live a diminished life of others' approval, not a full life of your own volition. And so self-trust is crucial to be able to live a complete experience. And how does one do that? In the same way that they build trust for other people. I think another component in here is that concept of integrity. I mentioned it was one of the synonyms in the dictionary definition. I know you always like, nobody cares about dictionary definitions, but to me, it was giving me like a little bit more insight into words and how we're using them and how I'm using them. And integrity is connected to individuation. It's an understanding of self that is undivided. It's understanding my whole complete self. Integrity is also following the complete self. So a piece of this is ensuring or watching for when the parts of myself internally, and again, I think this is where the introverted judging functions really come into play. I keep bringing it back there because I think they're the best access point. They're not the only one. It's complex and a lot of different components come in here. But I think they might be some of the most solid on-ramps. Is to just check in and see how I feel about myself in those ways. You can keep your finger on the pulse of when you're a house divided. Now, we did a whole podcast on the concept of individuation and what it means to be a complete self and a whole self. And that's a journey. It's not a destination. We don't actually live long enough to understand our whole self. And material is always coming in and being amalgamated because as we live life, we get more complex. We get more of ourselves to explore. We die long before full individuation happens. But we can, at any given time, understand a broader picture of ourselves. And sometimes we're leaving money on the table. Sometimes there are parts of ourselves that we could understand, but we're turning away from it. That's the whole idea of like, that's the thing over here that I don't want to look at, or that's the thing over here that I don't want to look at, generally called the shadow. Anything that's in our unconscious, anything we don't really want to look at, that's quote unquote shadow work. But what's the good news is that anytime we actually do look at it and bring it into the light, it's no longer shadow work. Now it's conscious. Now we're aware of it. And there will always be shadow content. There's always going to be things about ourselves that we don't currently have access to. But we can do the work of looking at those things. This is where responsibility comes into play. This is where a willingness to fail comes into play, an ability to learn from one's poor, good and bad choices. And this is where we are able to observe when we have contradictory and conflicting parts of ourselves. I think we believe that we need to, everything inside, all of the parts of us inside need to always be in chorus with each other when we make any choice. This is part of the reason why people hesitate, because they haven't made peace with the fact that 90% of you could be like, forward, let's go, let's march, there's nothing stopping us. And there will always be 10% is like, it's a terrible idea, we totally shouldn't do that. And we're like, oh, if there's any part of me that doubts it all, that means that I'm in conflict with myself and I can't move forward. I have no trust in my own ability to handle it and know that the 90% of me is probably the part I should be listening to. Once you understand that whole self, an undivided self, is not a self that is constantly in course with itself, right? It's not like the council members internally will always be shouting in a beautiful, harmony of every decision. There's always a part of you that's like, I don't think that's good for us. But if we're aware of it, then when we have this like little feeling, this little like, maybe it's not a good idea, that single tiny thought we won't give so much weight to, because we'll realize that's basically all decisions. Every once in a while, somebody won't have that. Every once in a while, somebody say, and then when I met my spouse or partner or my husband or wife or whatever, they'll go like every part of me, it was like Kundalini rising. Like every part of me was in the like, yes, absolutely, no questions, move forward. The universe gave me a download, everything, like angels were singing, and that was it. But if you notice, most people don't have that story about their partner.
Yeah.
That's just every once in a while we get struck with that. Or somebody goes, I knew for a fact that this was my purpose. Or I knew for a fact this one thing that, and it was so noteworthy because every other decision I've ever made in my life has always had a little bit of doubt. 100% of all the other ones, like 99.999 with like the line above the 9 have been like, there's been a part of me is like, maybe. But that one, that stood out because it was all 100% yes. If we understand how that mechanism works, that there's always a part of us that is questioning and is there for a purpose to make sure that we don't make terrible decisions, then we thank that part of ourselves and go, I get it. I trust that you're showing up just to make sure I've checked in. I trust that this part of me that's hesitant is making sure I've checked in with all the information I need to check in with. And then I'm going to trust that the other 90% of me being on board is good and I'm going to go forward. When we don't understand how that works, we don't get the concept of being, like the house divided is more about awareness than it is about chorus. It's about things whispering to us from the shadows that we're not really we're not directly paying attention to, so we're unsure of how much it's influencing us. When we do everything we can to bring that content into our conscious awareness, even if parts of ourselves are not on board with each other, we can at least manage and wrangle them and go, well, I guess I'm 51-49 on this one. Gonna go ahead with the 51 and we'll see what happens. And if the 49% of me was right, good for you, 49%, we'll learn the right lessons.
We probably need to wrap up here soon. And this podcast is titled Personality Types and Self-Trust. And I think a lot of times when people click on one of these episodes to listen to it or watch it, they want to look at every single one of the 16 Myers-Briggs types or every one of the Enneagram 9 types. And one of the things we do here at Personality Hackers, we can speak topically to a specific type, but we've really found a principle-based approach of understanding the core principles of something means that we can bring it awareness, and then you listening or watching can apply it to your own specific situation. Because not only are you uniquely wired with your Myers-Briggs type, but you also have an Enneagram type, and you have other preferences like how you code information, visual, kinesthetic, auditory. There's so many things that are unique to you and how you're wired that the principles we believe are going to help you the most. So let's just go back and kind of just touch into these principles we've talked about.
Yeah. And then I think what might be helpful is what are markers of having succeeded in building self-trust?
Great. So I think there's probably various different channels of self-trust. There's the ability to execute on a timeline, and will I be able to show up for that? There's a social situation. Can I handle a social situation? Can I trust myself that I'll be okay in that social dynamic? Can I trust myself that I'm not in a belief system or a narrative viewpoint that I'm contorting everything to match and I'm ignoring the things that I'm actually seeing? Can I trust myself that what I see and what I perceive is true, or should I trust the narrative instead? So these are some just different channels. And then we talked about from a cognitive function inside personality, Myers-Briggs system, Jungian cognitive functions. We talked about how probably there's, like, when you look at the function level, there's self-trust issues in all of them, but the center point, or at least the access point, the levers to pull, we could say are the two introverted judging functions of accuracy is the nickname we've given it, introverted thinking, or authenticity is the nickname we've given it, introverted feeling. And those two functions are some of where we can probably find the self-trust first to see where else it extends to outside of those functions. So those are the principles I'm taking away from this conversation. And I'm also, there was the other thing we touched upon about offense versus defense. A lot of people are playing defense of not believing the wrong thing, or they don't trust themselves to not do the wrong thing. And that's more of what they're maybe focused on than doing the right thing in a lot of ways, or believing the right way.
Yeah.
And did I miss any of the core principles? Is that all of the ones we kind of covered?
We also talk about taking responsibility.
Responsibility. That's the big one. Yeah.
Yeah. Taking responsibility for your actions, and how self-trust is sometimes, or a lack of self-trust is sometimes, an avoidance of taking responsibility. So
let's talk to the person right now that's, they listen along to our podcast and they're starting to build almost an owner's manual for their life. They're thinking, okay, I'm starting to get, our car model. I've got my cognition down. I'm listening to your series about all the different selves. I've been writing some in my journal. As someone's thinking about building that owner's manual of their life, like trying to figure out how do I operate, and like list out those things and things to reflect on and meditate on. You said there's some markers that you've identified that people can be tuned into to know if they've been successful or not, almost measurement tools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When a person builds self-trust, there is easier access to clarity.
Okay.
And so when a decision or a choice needs to be made, it doesn't feel constantly and perpetually opaque. It doesn't feel like, man, I could do literally anything, or what should I do here? There's a sense of clarity about what choices are available to you and which one you should choose for yourself. And then once that clarity is attained, and I'm not saying that every decision is always clear, but access to clarity becomes much easier. It's not this, I don't know, what do you think? It's, here are my choices, here are my possibilities, here's what I know about myself, here's the information I'm missing, and with all of that, I'm going to go ahead and choose this one. This is the right choice. And then because I have been able to create clarity around all of that, I'm going to have a higher sense of confidence in that choice. I'm going to move forward and not perpetually doubt myself. The other piece, we didn't really touch on this, is that when one lacks self-trust, even when they make a choice, sometimes they sabotage their choice because they're doubting it the entire way. It's almost decision, hangover, or it's like the indecisiveness and the lack of trust follows after the choice, and then it ends up sabotaging the decision. And then it was like, oh, I knew I couldn't trust myself in that. And it's like, well, you kind of create the circumstances so that you ended up making it bad. So there's a confidence that comes along with it. Once you gain a sense of self-trust, you gain greater access to clarity, and then a confidence to move it forward so that you're not sabotaging along the way. I think that's really important. So that's a marker. I think another marker is that you have overall healthier relationships. If you doubt yourself all the time, the amount of power you're going to place in other people's hands is not good for you. It makes you easier to exploit. It makes you vulnerable to them. And again, those people are not going to show up and fix mistakes that they unintentionally encouraged you to make because they were using their best judgment for themselves on you. This is how I see the world, so this is how you should see the world too. If it ends up being bad for you, they're not going to show up and take accountability for that. So there's a really unhealthy dynamic that gets created when a person lacks self-trust. But once you gain it, one of the markers is that your relationships become a lot more interdependent. I know myself, you know yourself, and now we can engage, as opposed to handing over way too much power to the other person, or alternatively, too little vulnerability or intimacy to others. Sometimes when people lack self-trust, they won't have any relationships because they don't trust themselves to be able, to not hand over power to others. Their lack of self-trust bleeds out onto other people, and now they don't trust anybody else either.
Yeah.
This is what happens with perfectionism, by the way. If you're a perfectionist, you end up being much harsher on everybody else. I know there's some perfectionists that are like, I'm only a perfectionist for myself. And it's like, that's only because you haven't been around somebody making a really big mistake, right? And once they do, they're like, what? I can't believe you did that. And it's like, well, if you were kinder to yourself, you'd have the capacity to be kinder to others as well.
Yeah.
So all your relationships just get a couple, well, not just a couple knocks up healthier. I mean, it gets substantially healthier once you're able to do that.
Okay. Something else is coming up for me though in the measurement and I'm thinking about mitigation. Like I just was thinking about, so like, again, somebody's listening or watching right now, kind of almost trying to map out their life, right? Create this experience where I kind of know how I work and I'm reflecting on my own self and I want to continue to build self-trust and all of that. But there's some areas where I know myself so well that I don't trust myself for in certain contexts. Let's take an example of somebody that wants to stop drinking. And you trust yourself that you want to stop drinking, that's your intent, like drinking alcohol or some other substance, stop smoking, stop drinking, I don't know, whatever it is. And you know that if you go to a party where that's available, you're probably, after a period of time, going to give into that. You can't trust yourself in that environment. And so I think there's a piece here where we're also wanting to build more self-trust and like willpower to resist certain things or to be able to rely on ourselves. But in some ways is context dependent too. Like I probably wouldn't, if I struggled with like smoking, I wouldn't want to hang out with people that are smoking all the time. If I struggle with alcohol or drugs, I'm not going to put myself in a party environment where those things are happening. And by staying home or staying out of the environment, I think I actually am trusting myself and honoring myself. I trust that I know how I work so well that I'm not going to put myself in a vulnerable position. Now, somebody might be listening though and say, well, I've got social anxiety. And I know that if I go to that party after a period of time, I'm going to feel social anxiety. I would argue that that's not a good thing to hold yourself back from. And so I'm realizing that as somebody's listening along, maybe creating kind of a map of their life, this mitigation strategy might throw this all off. Because when do we know if something's unhealthy and we shouldn't put ourselves in that environment and quote unquote, I'll just trust myself not to take a drink of alcohol or smoke or whatever the thing is, versus something that might be healthy to stretch ourselves out of, which is like put ourselves in that context to feel socially anxious. That's something we have to determine for the self. But I think mitigation strategy and prevention moves are important to talk about here too.
Yeah.
It gets super deep and nuanced, I think.
Yeah. I think that's an excellent question. And I believe that the person who discovered that they can't trust themselves with alcohol has already made enough mistakes to understand that.
Yeah.
So they aren't projecting, mistakes into a situation that they haven't experienced. They have the experience of having made the mistakes, and so now they are doing their best to not repeat them.
Yeah.
And self-trust it's not about trusting you're always going to make the right decision. It's trusting that you're going to set yourself up for success.
That's key.
And so in a situation where a person has possibly social anxiety, maybe they've had some bad experiences, but allowing yourself to just go, well, I have social anxiety. I guess I never have to engage with people, and I shouldn't engage with people because it makes me feel bad. This is not a person who's setting themselves up for success, because we need to have good social acumen in order to live a fuller life.
Yeah.
If we are constantly avoiding social situations, and by the way, I'm going to get a lot of heat from people right now. You just set me up to get heat,
and I realize I keep just opening more and more.
We do. We got to close it down.
I can't do this. We got to start, landing the plane.
That's
here.
right. Okay, and so I'll go back to markers of self-trust, but I will say the thing right now.
Wait, why are you going to get in trouble? Because you're suggesting people go into socially anxious places?
Yeah, because I'm not giving people with social anxiety a lot of quarter right now.
Well, if you're an introvert that struggles with this and you want an out, we give you special dispensation to...
No, I don't.
I'm joking.
Yeah, no, I don't actually. I think that social anxiety is an understandable challenge.
Yeah.
Completely and utterly understandable. And it's not something that I currently struggle with, but I did when I was younger.
Yeah.
Now, I also have the advantage to being an extroverted type, and introverts believe that extroverts automatically are better at socializing. But my social anxiety didn't come from a fear of people. It came from the fact that for many, 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 many years, I always said the wrong thing, and I always got in trouble for it. Every time. I was raised in a very...
You didn't contort yourself to the narrative enough.
Well, or at least I wasn't playing it out in the right way.
Yeah.
And so I came from a very locked down religion, and if you said the wrong thing, you were going to get a talking to.
Yeah.
And for many years, I had people were giving me a talking to. I just kind of expected it. Like every time I went to church, I was like, somebody's going to go give me a talking to, and I wasn't wrong. So my anxiety came from the fact that I thought that literally everything I said was the wrong thing. And in some ways, being an extrovert messed me up because I couldn't stop talking. I was like, everybody needs to hear what I have to say, right? Oh, I'm in trouble again. So a part of me doesn't give quarter to those kinds of situations because social anxiety itself is a lack of self-trust.
Well, and
it's not trusting that one can navigate through those situations and get to the other side and be okay.
And to go back to when we were defining trust, we talked about the element when it's a verb, strong and safe, is what we're creating, the safety. And I wrote it at the very beginning of the episode, talking about people are seeking, quote unquote, safe spaces in the outer world. And I think there's something related to this idea of self-trust here too. But again, it's nuanced because I agree with someone that trusts themselves enough to not put themselves in a bad situation where they'll make a bad choice for themselves. Mm-hmm. That's different than putting yourself in a situation that stretches yourself. And that's a self-assessed distinction, I think. The next podcast topic is going to be about self-confidence. It's the last one, and we're wrapping up with self-confidence. Yeah.
I'd like to kick this conversation to the self-confidence conversation.
Let's do it.
Okay. And that way we can wrap up because I have a feeling that this one's going kind of long.
It's totally fine.
Joel's like, but I've got more loops to open. You got to chill.
I'll land them.
Finish with my list of markers of a person who has gained self-trust.
Cheers.
And
Let's
then
do it.
Cheers. And then we can wrap up. Okay.
Fair
so
enough.
The first marker was clarity in decisions and a confidence to be able to do those. A second marker is healthier relationships where you're not over relying on the other person or cutting yourself off from relationships because you don't trust yourself. And I think that a final marker of self-trust is a person's, and this is what I had to learn by getting over my social anxiety, which is that I can assert the things that I say with confidence, but I don't have to come across as a know-it-all. I don't have to come across as arrogant. I can just speak from my own trust in my ability to understand something or have good judgment.
And you're saying arrogance because that was how you overcompensated. But you're saying basically the principle is you can speak with authority from yourself without overcompensating, and however you would do that.
Yeah.
In your own, like I might do it differently than a know-it-all.
Yeah. Well, I think there's two sides of this. There's like the super hesitant voice that is like, what should I do here? But they're not saying what should I do here. It's just their voice is saying that, right? Their voice tonality is constantly self-questioning. And a overcompensation for that is arrogance, is just bulldozing or acting like a know-it-all or always assuming you know everything. That's actually when somebody comes across like they can't ever be wrong, that is a sign of a lack of self-trust because they can't get any pushback. They can't have anybody say, well, have you thought about this? And then again, that's that ownership, that responsibility, the willingness to make mistakes. They can't go, I hadn't thought of it that way. And so now they have to have an affectation that warns people, don't give me any pushback. And so when a person has self-trust, you're going to hear it in the tonality of their voice. You're going to hear them rest into what they know, be willing to be wrong, be willing to take other people's thoughts and opinions into consideration, They won't overly hand over power, like their voice going, "What do you think?" basically. But they also won't give an affectation that warns everybody else, if you give me pushback, I'm going to release the dog, right? Or I'm going to release the hounds on you. And so the ability to live a full life comes from all of this. Because when a person shows up with these qualities and characteristics, other people trust them. Other people rest into them. It greases the wheels of all your interactions. It greases the wheels of all of the situations you find yourself in. And it gives you the ability to have a much, much fuller and richer life with a lot less anxiety, a lot less tension, a lot less self-flagellation. It's just an overall nicer way to experience life.
Yeah. So you listening or watching right now, what is coming up for you in this conversation? Are you somebody that struggles with self-trust? Do you have lots of self-trust? Do you have categories of self-trust and self-distrust? Self-distrust, I guess that's how you'd say it.
Mistrust.
Mistrust. There you go. Distrust, mistrust. Do you trust yourself in all areas? Do you struggle with this? Is this something you've had to overcome? We want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com directly below this episode. Leave a comment, ask a question. More importantly, share your story. Maybe you have a story of overcoming challenges and you built self-trust over time. I think that would be really interesting to hear and have a conversation started around that. So there's not a third microphone here, but you've heard me and Antonia talk in this conversation. Now it's your chance to come and make your voice heard. Come over to personalityhacker.com. We want to hear from you.
Mm-hmm. Somebody congratulated me on getting the ending down, but I have to admit.
So now the stakes are high.
I don't trust myself. And it was like, congratulations on getting the ending down. I'm like, all right, here we go. Let's see if I can do it.
You've literally done this for years. I trust you, Antonia.
You trust me?
Yes.
All right, here we go. Let's see how I perform. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave a rating and review for us on iTunes, it helps us out a lot. And I read them all, by the way, so please do so. Please let us know how we're doing in iTunes. We are now on YouTube, and this is being watched by people through a video podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, you can like and subscribe and hit that little alarm belly thing that lets you know when a new episode goes up. You can also leave a comment and ask a question under the YouTube video. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating and review on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. And of course, we have a suite of programs that are tailored to your type and focus on personal growth. So our whole mission is to help people gain greater self-awareness, build their self-value and self-worth, build their self-esteem, build their self-trust, right?
Yeah.
Get inside who you are and inquire within in order to have the best relationship with yourself. So if you are ready to take your personal growth to the next level, head over to personalityhacker.com, look at that catalog, and see which program is right for you.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.